Before I actually bring you this week's show, I just wanted to say a couple words about Marty Sklar. I actually had the incredible opportunity to have a few minutes with Marty, to meet him. He signed my book. Well, he signed his book to my kids. And I got to tell him how much his work has meant to me over the years. And I had heard stories from other people who had met Marty over the years about how gracious of a man he was, how kind he was, how intelligent and how compassionate he was. And really, in meeting him, just for the 5 minutes that I got to talk to him, that really just stood out to me. It was amazing. And I told my wife, Amy, as soon as I got back to our hotel room after the D23 Expo, that it was such a surreal moment to meet the man and to meet another one of the people that started Disneyland with Walt Disney. I was very sad last week to hear the news that Marty had passed away. And I feel incredibly fortunate that I had just a couple of minutes to talk with him. You can just tell just from a couple minutes with him that he was such a nice man. And I know he will be truly missed by the Disney community. Now, this episode that you're about to hear was recorded in between the D23 Expo and the passing of Marty Sklar. So you'll hear Bob Gurr playfully joke around about Marty and his cane. And you could tell by the way Bob talks about Marty how deep their friendship was and how much he meant to him. And I just wanted to make sure that you, the listener, knew that this was recorded before Marty's passing. Okay, on to episode 82, my chat with Disney legend Bob Gurr.
Welcome aboard the Ear to Their podcast, the podcast that'll help you vacation like a pro in any Disney destination. For those of you standing, please sit down and hold on throughout our journey and get ready to learn how to have the time of your life. And now, here's your host, Phil Gramlich.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ear to Their podcast. I'm your host, Phil Gramlich. I am also the owner and operator of Ear to Their Travel, which is a Disney-specialized travel agency. It's my job to take away all that stress, all that anxiety, and all the time that it takes to plan a Disney trip, so you can focus on the fun things like having a great time with your family and friends and enjoying the magic. You can find this podcast, my blog, or request a free, no-obligation quote over at eartotheirtravel.com. Also, look for me each and every, hopefully, Thursday at 7:30 Eastern Time. That's when I'll be on Facebook Live. That address is facebook.com/eartotheirphil. Each week, we'll talk Disney, we'll talk rumors, new things that are going on, all kinds of Disney stuff. I was off the Facebook Live thing for a while with a bit of a bitty? No, that's not right. With a bit of a busy summer. But we'll be getting back into it this week, and I will talk to you on Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay, this is episode number 82 for the week of August 7th, 2017. Now, grab a drink, grab a snack, and as a famous mouse once said, on with the show.
When hinges creak in doorless chambers, and strange and frightening sounds echo through the halls. Whenever candlelights flicker, where the air is deathly still, that is the time when ghosts are present, practicing their terror with ghoulish delight.
My special guest in the show once said, "If it moves on wheels at Disneyland, I probably designed it." In a Disney career that spanned more than 40 years, he designed more than 100 vehicles, including the Main Street vehicles, Autopia cars, Disneyland monorails, Doom buggies, and many more. He was named a Disney legend in 2004 and received his own window on Main Street in 2009. It's my honor to welcome Disney legend Bob Gurr to the show. Bob, thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey, my pleasure. Anytime, as long as you got intelligent questions, I'll talk to you.
Well, that remains to be seen, I think. We'll see how I do. But thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I was so bummed I was out at D23 a week and a half ago at this point, and I missed you when you were there. I forget who the gentleman who was sitting next to you or next to your empty chair was. And he said, he should be back in a couple minutes. But I had to run and do another interview, so I didn't get to meet you. So I was kind of bummed out about that. So hopefully in a couple years, you'll be at the next one so I can get to meet you in person.
Well, yeah, I would, to recover from D23, last week I went to Comic-Con in San Diego.
That's your recovery, huh?
Yeah, because, I used to go to D23 a lot, and then this year I was not able to go to one show, and I wasn't able to look at any of the booths because the minute my face showed up, I was so swamped with selfie and autograph demands, I just couldn't see a thing. But at Comic-Con, with probably 3 times the crowd, only 3 people recognized me. So I was it was a pleasure.
You got to put your feet up and relax on that one. Yeah, I could imagine. I actually had a chance to meet Marty Sklar out there over the weekend, and I was one of the first ones that got to his booth when he got there. So I didn't have to wait in one of those long lines. But I know you guys kind of get mobbed when you're out with the Disney fans.
Yeah, well, Marty has life really easy because when he's selling a book or he's got a signing, hour or 2 that he's going to do it, people show up. And then when that period is over, if he sits there or he walks around, everybody leaves him alone.
Yeah, but you're different.
Yeah, well, he's got a cane, and he hits me with a cane from time to time. So I think I need to get a cane.
All right, well, listen, Bob, I know you've done a million of these, so I want to change it up and ask you kind of a different question. I hope it's a different question to start off. I've heard you in different interviews, and I've seen you on YouTube and stuff saying that you can't stand the word process. Can you tell me why that's a bad word to you?
Yes, this happens all the time. Let's put it this way. Generally speaking, the intelligent and trained people of the world have been exposed to proper education. And in education, there is a thing called a by rote process. In other words, this implies that in order to get anything done in an organized manner, you must follow a process. In the Walt Disney world of long ago, we had no processes. I didn't know what a process was. And if you stop and think, Walt had projects, everyone was different when it was new, and you never repeated anything over, which in a way, in hindsight, any process would have been a very stifling thing. So in those early years, we simply did a de facto process that fit the exact project we were working on. That is to say, depending on the specific construct that you're working on, you have a whole different bunch of ways you do stuff, and you make it up as you go in order to best fit what you're doing. If you stop and think about that, if you have something that's new and unique and always different, done in entirely different manners and sequences, the lack of process allows you to go full speed. That's the simplest way to explain it.
So did they, back when you first started working there, did somebody say come to you with a budget and say, okay, this is what you can do, you have this budget to work on it, just get it done? Or was it a different kind of way that they went about it?
Phil, what is a budget?
So do you want me to define it for you, or were you asking me rhetorically?
No, I'm pulling your leg.
I know.
Look, it's simple. Today, when a project of any size gets started in any organization, there'll be a whole bunch of things like a budget, the man loading list, the list of specifications, the list of restraints, the list of compliances, and a whole bunch input by a whole bunch of people, and then to get corporate approval. That might take a year. All right, let's go back to Walt Disney. Walt Disney will walk up to somebody, Fred Jerger or Harriet in the in model shop, or he'll come over to the machine shop where my boss Roger Brogie's there, and the 3 of us will start a little conversation, and Walt will say, say, Bobby, we're thinking of doing, and then he'll tell me what he's going to get started on. And might be a 2 or 3 minute conversation. Then he says, well, I think you ought to get started. And then he turns and walks away. Now, that's how a project launches, and it has no process. So I immediately start poking my nose into all the things I'm going to need to know and dig up and go find and get started on all the appropriate parts in any sequence I want to do it.
Yeah, that's really amazing, and it's such a more efficient way to work than a way especially now that the Disney company does things where, Star Wars Land is announced in 2015, and they tell us 2019 is when we're going to get to finally experience it. And I mean, I was out there 2 years ago as well at D23 when they announced it. And I thought, all right, maybe a couple years, and here, we're waiting until 2019 to get something like that. I'm sure that had something to do, just all the red tape and all the channels that has to go through to get everything approved.
Yes, the process is actually it's sort of a swampy bog that you drag your work through, and all it does is impede you, because its main requirement is to report to upper management. Are you complying with what you're supposed to do? Is it meeting the specifications? Are all the other team members that have to come in and ask their questions through their coordinators, and then go back to explain to the managers what the heck is going on? And it can get so disconnected from the realities of the creative people that after a while you get a rocket rod or you get a Luigi's tires.
What's funny is I had that saved. I had that Luigi's tires pegged as a question for you for later on in the interview. But I wanted to get your opinion on it now, because you worked on a pretty similar attraction. What is it, in the 60s, the Flying Saucers?
Yes.
And neither of them really lasted very long. Is there a reason why? Were they difficult? I remember riding on one a couple of years ago, and I only rode it once, and I found it kind of difficult to maneuver the vehicle around. Is that why they didn't last both times?
Let's talk first about the Luigi's tires. Quite a number of years ago, WDI built a big test installation in Glendale, and it was up on a high structure where nobody could see it very well, so that you couldn't see it unless you climbed up a ladder to get to the test deck. And they showed me the vehicle and said, well, Bob, jump in there and ride it and tell us what you think. Well, I took one look at it. I took a look at the size, and I took a look at the operating system, and I gave it a test drive. And they said, what do you think? And I says, well, this will probably work if you cut the weight way down and you reconsider the idea of using 2 passengers, because the configuration of the Luigi tire vehicle is such that the company wanted to have double capacity. So to double the capacity, the vehicle got quite big. Due to some constraints, I don't know what they were, the vehicle was very big and very heavy, had a very awkward way to try to enter it. And the problem was then that in actual practice, they didn't try to restrict the type of guests that would ride on it, because politically you can't do that. So now you have this 2-seat vehicle, which in some cases will have about a 60-pound tall, skinny kid that's high enough to ride it, or you'll have 2 300-pound frothers riding it. Now, each one of those guests will not have any kind of a ride. The little kid his body weight relative to the weight of the whole saucer is not big enough to create enough tip angle in order to accelerate it. And in the case of the now 600 pounds of guests, it'll just sit there, and the skirt drag is too excessive. But if you're sort of in the middle weight thing, 2 lightweight people or 1 fairly good size, and you understand how it works, yes, you get a very good ride out of it. But guess what? It actually turned out that in the line, the guests will have all this information printed on a wall. They'll have all this information given to them by the cast members, and they pay no attention because they're texting and chattering all the time. Then when they get on the vehicle, they say, gee, this thing doesn't work. Well, I'm sorry, folks, you didn't pay attention. All right, now let's go back to the original flying saucer. They had an entirely different operating system wherein it had valves in the deck where, due to a very clever, simple thing, the pressurized air would be underneath the flying saucer. And when the flying saucer would move, it would open and close the valves in front of it and behind it. Whereas in the Luigi's tires, you had the valves blowing air all the time. So it's a 100% loss system, but it did get rid of simple little valves. Okay, back to the original flying saucer. The vehicle was kept extremely light. Aero Development saw that they were the developers of it, both the system and the size of the car. They saw that we're going to have absolute minimum weight for the thing to work. And so that was very obvious. Then that way, when guests would go to ride it, we didn't really give instructions. You just sort of looked at it and says, oh, that must be fun. And you would almost figure out very quickly, because the car was so light and people weren't that big in those days, the slightest movement that you did, you got that vehicle to move very quickly in any direction. And people caught on to that really fast. In fact, a lot of people did re-rides because if you study it in operation, you know exactly how to get the best ride, such as when you run out to jump in a vehicle, pick one that's got a big clear span of distance so that you can accelerate really, really fast compared to everybody else, and you can just bang the daylights out of everybody. But in Luigi's tires, you wind up having people, they run to the first car, not even thinking about it. And guess what? Because of the sluggishness of the ride, many of the cars are sitting in a pack. And even though you know how to make the Luigi's tire work, guess what? You don't get to move hardly at all because you're trapped amongst a bunch of people who can't get the darn thing to work. And then all of a sudden the air's off, the ride's over, and you go out and you say, boy, does that suck.
I that's kind of the experience that we had. And my wife and I, a couple years ago, we rode it. And a friend of mine did exactly what you said. He found the one. He actually works at Disneyland. He found the one that had the room around it, and he banged us up the entire time, and we kind of sat in a corner. So I could see how it didn't catch on.
Well, I had a good each time I rode Luigi's tires, probably at least a dozen times. I followed my rules that I just explained to you about. I have my eye on which vehicle I want to get to. Because I'll be in a better position. And of course, I'm 86 now, but a couple of years ago, I was only like 83 or something. And I could just run right out and grab the car I wanted. And the minute that air came on, I knew exactly how much to lean to tip it. Because what you got to do, you got to tip it enough to get the air to squirt out the back, but not enough for the front end to drag.
Right.
And a lot of people do not understand that. So I would usually get going and make a full speed path in order to ram the barrier, because when I come off the barrier, I've got a big impact of kinetic energy. And by the time I twirl to the next car, I hit the other car just utterly mad, almost knocked the people out of the car. So a lot of people aren't having any fun. I'm having the fun.
Right. See, you wouldn't have been able to do that if you had Marty's cane. You wouldn't be able to run across the deck there. You would have to slowly kind of amble across.
Well, I was an ideal weight, right around 165 pounds is pretty ideal. You're light enough that the car will come up high enough that you won't drag the skirt very much, and you have enough weight that you can shift that center of gravity very easily.
Right. So just kind of as an aside, what do you think of the attraction they replaced it with, the Rollickin' Roadsters?
I have no idea what it is. I've never been there.
Okay, so you haven't seen it yet. Yeah, it's we got to do it last week. It was fun. It's a synchronized. They bill it as like a synchronized car dance party, basically. So I don't know how it works. You would know probably by looking at it. I couldn't figure it out. I didn't see any tracks or anything on the ground, so I couldn't quite figure out how they do it. But my kids liked it. They're 6 and 4. They had fun. So that was what was important to me. But so going back, we're right now kind of in the present. I wanted to go back a little bit to when you first started with the Disney company and exactly how. I know a lot of my listeners know who you are, but I'm not sure if they all know your story. So how did you come to work for the Disney company?
Well, when I was 5 years old, I liked cars and airplanes. By the time I got into high school, I wanted to be an engineer, but my math failed, so I went to Art Center School to design car bodies because that takes no math. Got a General Motors scholarship, went to Detroit, got hired by the Ford Motor Company, designing cars. I decided in 2 weeks that was a dead-end job, came back in a year and a day, formed my own company, and one of my first clients was Walt Disney, and they had worked for me for 2 weeks. And then I said, I might as well hire on here if this thing's going to have more work.
So that
was it.
I was going to say, you seem like you've told that story before.
Oh, yes.
Maybe once or twice, right?
Right.
So the first thing you got to work on, was it the Autopia, right? Was the first vehicle that you got a chance to kind of get working on?
Yes. Walt did not want to buy a standard amusement car from, a typical manufacturer for carnivals. He wanted his own car, and he had an engineer up in the little town of Montrose who could design a chassis for a car, but he couldn't design a body. So that job kind of stalled out, so Walt had somebody go down to Art Center School to see if he can find anybody that would help. And like I say, a school project to design the body for a Disneyland Autopia car. But the headmaster of that school said, told Walt, no way am I going to have my students doing your job for no pay, because Walt was running out of money. So anyway, then a compromise was, can we find anybody? And they asked me, they said, do you do outside work? Well, I didn't, but I said yes anyway. And a couple of days later, I was asked to go out to the studio, and I saw that they needed a body for a little car. And to me, it was like pretty obvious what they need. So I just started in on it.
Wow. So, that your first attraction you ever worked on. Now, how did that work? Did you would just submit a design and it would tell you, okay, this is good or this isn't good, we don't like this? Or how many kind of drafts did you go through before they said, all right, this is exactly what we're looking for?
Just a minute, Phil. You're talking about a process.
I am? I didn't realize I was thinking process.
Yes, you were. You talking about a process.
I'm sorry. I told myself I wouldn't allude to a process at all.
Okay, I go in there on a morning of a day in the middle of the week, and they show me the car, and I said, yes, I could see what you need there. You need a little body for that car. And they said, well, why don't you come in on Saturday with a sketch? So I came in with 3 or 4 sketches on a Saturday morning. Yeah, Walt was working people 6 days a week and paying them for 5 days. Wow. Try that one today. So of those first few sketches, they could say that, oh, yeah, there's several ways we could do this. So then I said, well, I'll come back the second week. I'll refine one of the sketches that I kind of like, way I like the car, which was turned out the way the one we did. I think I only made like 5 pictures or so, but one car I really liked because that was the one that would make the most sense. So in the course of that conversation, Roger Brogy Sr., who was the manager of the machine shop, phoned me up, I think on the second Saturday, and he says, do you draft? And I says, yes. So he says, well, get your tools and come on over here. So that meant I could do some work on a Saturday, and then Walt was there, and then I asked about, well, is there going to be more stuff here? And he said, oh, I got a lot more stuff for you. So I quit my regular job and came over.
Wow.
At no time did I have to submit a sketch for approval or anything like that. It was just a case of Roger gave me a drafting board, so I just help myself and I do what needs to be done to develop the car chassis. Turned out the little chassis that Johnny Hartman had built his nose got out of joint because Walt told him, he said, well, if you can't build a body, you're not going to build a car. So Disney will build the car themselves. And Walt assumed that if I did bodies, I did the mechanical engineering. Well, I didn't. I have no engineering training. I kept my mouth shut and thought, well, how much can I learn here so I can re-engineer the chassis from a prototype into a production chassis. So you just do it. Walt walks around once in a while. He comes in, sees what you're doing, and in no time gives you a specification or tells you what he wants. He just sees that you're doing about what he'd like to have you do. And Roger Brogy, who's my boss, I needed some questions about manufacturing or things like that, sources of vendors for parts. And we just go dig out the information, and we'd say, I need some clutches, or I need some this, or wheels. Okay, we'll just go over the vendor, and we'll just order the parts. And that's it. I'm not explaining anything to anybody.
Yeah, so there was no one kind of standing your way, or no, you didn't have to sign anything or cross any lines. It was just, this is what you want, go get it and get it done. That's very different. It's very different today.
Roger was very good about don't let anybody work on anything, know the price of anything.
Wow.
What you need is the best stuff you can get and the fastest way you can get stuff done. And you don't let a budget concern get in the way. Now, the time constraint was automatic because the date of opening, everybody knew the date of opening. So it was your job to figure out which things do we do the first fastest with the longest lead items, and so that when the whole kit and caboodle gets done, it's done enough for an opening day at Disneyland.
So when you say that you had the opening date, like does that kind of mean that like Walt would come to you and say, like say with the monorail for example, did he come to you with the monorail idea and say, okay, like Bob, we're building a monorail, this is when it's opening, just go do it?
Well, yes.
Wow. That's kind of hard. It's
almost all the things I remember working on, the great big jobs, the date was already established by the time he asked somebody to get started.
Wow. Yeah, that doesn't happen now. I don't think.
Oh, it doesn't happen.
No. So what was that like when you worked on a monorail? Because that was, correct me if I'm wrong, that was the first monorail like system in this country, or am I crazy about when I say that?
No, it was the first one in the Western Hemisphere. Wow. Is the easiest way to say what it was.
Right. So how do you go about getting that started? Do you have a picture? I know that Walt had been in, was it Switzerland and had seen it and kind of got inspired by it, or Sweden or something like that. I'm sorry. I should have done my homework.
No, well, that's all right. You'll the longer you talk to me, your homework will get done.
There you go.
No, Walt, several years before Disneyland opened, he had a document that he was listing all the stuff he'd like to see in his Disneyland. One of them was the word monorail, but it was not specific. Also, if you look really close at the original Herb Ryman drawing, the lower right-hand corner where there's a Tomorrowland-like place, behind a building, you'll see a monorail, which is a hanging type. It hangs from a beam or a track or a rail up in the sky.
Sure.
Most people, they look and they didn't even see that. So Walt had this idea in mind, and then in 1958, he and Lily, his wife, were driving on a little road in Cologne, Germany, and this monorail goes right across the roadway, right above him, through these trees. Now he'd seen a monorail, so he immediately went over and talked to him and got started with a negotiation within just a couple days. And then he had a team of people go back over there really quick and negotiate a preliminary contract basis. Then Walt came into my office and he brought me these pictures of this pretty ugly looking railroad car that looked like a loaf of bread with a slot in the bottom sitting on a stick. It really wasn't very. I wouldn't have done something like that. It looked like. Front end looked like an old World War II German bomber, actually.
Wow.
And all Walt said was, in a couple of minutes, he left me the pictures and left me a couple of technical drawings of how the thing works. It's called German saddlebag beamway. And he says, "Well, Bobby, I want you to get started on this, and work with your boss. He'll get you some more help. And get started." So, in a matter of a day or two, I could see the problem of the appearance of the train. This loaf of bread with a stick, sitting on a stick. We have to hide that slot. So I thought it's like a camouflage job. What can I do to do that? So I came up with the idea of a pointed vehicle like a Buck Rogers spaceship. But if you look at that old Buck Rogers spaceship, it had these sort of splayed fins, like a little kid's sled, that it would land on the planet. It just sort of slide to a halt. It's all very fantasy. But I thought, that would be a good way to camouflage the slot. We'd still have the same slot, of course, but your eye would see the pointed nose and it would see these splayed lower side fins. And then I made the body kind of roundy looking so that the fins kind of splayed out a bit, and that made the thing not look so tall. And then, of course, you have big wraparound windshield, and you put a bubble canopy on the top like a Boeing B-47 bomber. Those are the elements. That fell into place with no other sketches. I just went right straight to what I thought the answer was. I made a quick sketch on my kitchen table one morning, and then when I got into the office, I made a rendering of it, and that rendering is what you see all the time when you see the thing called monorail crossing. I made the picture, and then we had an artist, I think it was John Hench, he put the color on it. And Walt came over to look at the thing, and he just said, "Bobby, can you build that?" And I said, "Yeah." And he smiled and walked out, and that was it.
Wow.
That was the approval process.
And that picture's that's the famous one that you have on the cover of your book, and it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. I think in hindsight, if you're going very fast and you want to solve a problem, you don't dilly-dally with a bunch of alternate sketches. You don't submit them for approval. You don't get near a committee, because the committee's going to sit there and they're going to nitpick everything to death. So what you do, you go really fast before anybody knows what you're doing and get it going. And the only guy you got to make happy is Walt.
Right.
Just simple as that.
I have to ask you something, too. I don't know if you're familiar with the miniature artist, Robert Olszewski.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I have his Disneyland, his Main Street. I have the entire set. And I have his monorail piece. I haven't actually installed the working train or the monorail on my platform yet, but I have it in my house, the whole setup. And I'm right now in my office, I have the monorail piece. And one thing that stands out to me when I look at it is it doesn't have those fins on the bottom. The version that he made has those fins as it kind of looks now, but it's supposed to be a retro piece. Did it lose those fins somewhere along the line?
When you say fin, do you mean these displayed lower body part?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what I mean.
No, all the Disney monorails have always had that fin shape, every one of them.
Then maybe I'm thinking like the tail light thing that comes. That's what I mean.
Well,
that
okay.
Comes off. That's what I meant.
Yeah, you need to be more specific, because the original Mark I train was very directional specific. It had the sloped, sloped fin, but the back, because it's moving away from you, big old Cadillacs, you always put big fins in the back. You put big fat taillights. That's a 59 Cadillac taillight.
Wow.
Blown way up inside.
That is so cool. That's how you got the idea for it. That's amazing.
Well, yeah, because it was a logical thing to do, but they were only there for a few months. One day I went down to the park and the fins were gone. We had a problem where when the train backed into the roundhouse, or not the roundhouse, but the place where we restored the train, they would occasionally catch on the bus bar brackets and break. And the way the guys in the shop solved it was the minute I was not there, they just sawed them off and buttered it up, and we were done. And I was so mad about that.
I'm sure.
But but it does tell you in a timeline which photographs are which in the early days of Disneyland, which ones have the taillights and which ones don't.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And then obviously because of the when we go to the Mark 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 monorails, they are bi-directional, because it's a simpler way to do it.
Right. Right.
But I got away with what I wanted before anybody stopped me.
Nice. It's all about the speed. Get it done fast. I saw this. Speaking of monorails, I saw a tip on YouTube, or a clip. I'm sorry, not a tip, where you talked about the higher ups or the people who were kind of running the show when you were building the Walt Disney World monorail were worried about the vibration of it coming through the contemporary main building. And I was wondering if you could share with me and with my listeners the story of you getting the test drive the monorail.
Yes, I think a lot of architects and civil engineers, they think of overhead trains. They immediately think of the Chicago L, which is a big vibrating rattle trap of a system. And they assume that a monorail going through a building would cause the same kind of noise and vibration and disruption. They would not believe that a monorail with the suspension it's got with rubber tires and a very high-density concrete beam, there's going to be no detectable vibrations imparted into the building, but they still wouldn't believe it. So there was an agreement made that this was 1971, pre-opening. In fact, it turned out to be Labor Day, where all the construction crew would be away for the day. That we picked that day to set up a seismograph. We had a seismograph that I had the company buy several years before. It was called an AR-240 strong motion oscillograph that's used for measuring earthquakes in buildings. But we've been using it for testing vehicles in order to figure out all the ride forces. So we bolted this big old box, bolted it down to the concrete deck, and then I was supposed to drive the train while a couple of people there were to operate the seismograph. So the idea was that I would go through the building at wide open power and how fast as the train would go. And I remember coming in from the south side, and there's an opening that the train passes through. And I'm going about 42 miles an hour, and I thought that opening is too small. You're going through the mouse port,
Yeah.
Oh, I went through there, and the train I never saw such a sight. I went through that hotel. I didn't even take 10 seconds to go through the length of the building.
Man.
And then on the radio, they said, "Okay, it looks good. No, we're not getting any data. Come back, do it again." So I went around for a lap and came back around again and did that. And it turned out the seismograph didn't detect anything. But my hair was standing on end at the end of that session because I was the only person of record ever went faster than 5 miles an hour through that building.
Oh, man. Did you get anybody to film it? Did they film that for you or anything?
No, this was a secret test. We had it ready. Labor Day, nobody's there except Dave Gengenbach, who's the monorail manager, and a couple of civil engineer architect guys.
I kind of wish I could see the video of the monorail going through there that fast.
Well, we didn't have video in those days, really.
No, yeah, I guess you wouldn't. Yeah. Well, that's such a cool story. I heard it before, but I wanted to hear you say it just because it is. I mean, that's amazing to be able to. I can't imagine seeing that little hole in the side of the inside of the Contemporary and thinking, I might not make it through here. That's got to be.
Yeah. Well, it was such an outrageous thing that we had to do that I have today an absolutely vivid memory of doing that. It's a vivid memory as strong as when I got a ride in the P-51 Mustang years ago. Those kind of things where you're doing something really fast that, man, your recording disc in your brain is just soaking it all up forever.
Sure. When Disney World still offered the Richard Petty Speedway experience, my wife and I bought my father-in-law a ride in a Ferrari over there, and he has all kinds of pictures of that. And he drives a Lexus. I think he thinks he's a race car driver where he lives. He likes to drive fast, so that was a really cool thing, kind of to give him. What's the fastest you've ever gone in a car? Can I ask you?
121 at the Petty Experience in its first few months when we were using some sort of phonied up NASCAR cars.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the minute that was available. I wanted to go do that.
Sure.
It was a really simple operation, but I'd been watching NASCAR forever, so it was very natural to drive the car, following their instructions. In fact, I snookered the instructor that you go out with. They take a lead car, and then he works you up in speed, and then I would lag back coming out of turn 3. He got way ahead of me, and that way I could really honk onto it halfway through the apex of turn 3, and I would go down that straightaway way faster than he went.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, and then that last lap, they let me know to come on into the pits.
Yeah, I'm sure they weren't that happy with you at that point.
Yeah, that was funny because they said, yeah, we saw what you did there. You went way faster than you were supposed to go. And the other guys were going 100, and I was going 121. Man. And then they said, we listened to you. We had some young guys, guys in their 20s that were all macho in those same sessions, and they weren't doing too good. But they said, how did you know how to do all this? We could listen to you go on and off the throttle so smooth all around every turn. He says, how do you do that? And I said, well, I'm an old guy. I can do that.
You've been doing it a lot longer than they have.
Oh, yeah.
That's so. All right. So I have to ask you about a story, and it's kind of changing gears, but I've read this story for years, or I've heard this story for years, and I wanted to get it from you to see if it's true or how much of it is true. I read that the Doom Buggy, the vehicle for the Haunted Mansion, somehow, I know that you came up with it, but you came up with it with the by looking at a candy apple on somebody's desk. Is that a true story?
Oh, that is true. Right after the New York World's Fair, there were some nice attractions at the 64, 65 World's Fair. And one of them was like a train of vehicles where people ride in a vehicle. So if you have an endless chain of vehicles, you don't have to have an anti-collision system, and you're going to have a pretty high capacity. But I was sitting in John Hench's office and just having a casual conversation about, what can we do in the future to have both a high capacity attraction, a reliable one, and at the same time tell the story a little bit better. Now, most vehicles up to that time, the seat would be attached to the vehicle, whether it's a boat or anything, and you always are facing forward and you look right and left to look at the show. So all you see is the back of the vehicle in front of you, and it's only a couple of feet away. So I picked up this candied apple he just had sitting on his desk, and I started twirling, and I says, John, what if I take a train of vehicles on a chassis, and then instead of bolting the seats to the chassis, I'll put a post, and I can rotate the seat part of the body. I can rotate that right and left, and in fact, I could tip it backwards or tip it forwards. So in other words, we have ability to yaw right and left and pitch back and forward in the pitch axis. And I says, I think the art directors will love this because we can be telling a story with a scene on the right side of the car, facing it. And then as we move to the next scene, I could twirl that car really quickly, say from the right to the left, even as the chassis of the vehicle is turning, and we can chop quite a few seconds out of the segue between scenes. And that way, for the same length of attraction, we can have longer viewing seconds in each one of the scenes. It was so simple. And I said, this is a great way to move people. And then I said, we look in all directions. And at that time, I was a pilot. And one of the things to do with aviation is a radio navigational directional system called Omni range. Omni meaning all. So I said, John, it'll be an omnimover. So that name got stuck in a few seconds, and we've been stuck with it ever since because we never come up with a trade name for it. So I started doing that for Monsanto right away for the Voyage to Inner Space. And then the team that had been working years on the Haunted Mansion as a walkthrough said, oh my gosh, this will solve the walkthrough dwell problem. And we can control the scene. So now we know what to do. So the Haunted Mansion, everybody remembers the Doom Buggy, but they forget that the Monsanto Voyage to Inner Space actually had it first.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is, so not only, I mean, you invented a lot of different things in Disneyland, but you invented here an entire, basically a whole generation of ride vehicles in one shot with the Omnimover system.
Well, in the Disney organization, we had so many people that were like free thinkers because they didn't have a process. And a lot of ideas would show up just in casual conversations between, any number of people without being a formal team organized to research something. This is a modern way to do it. You always have people that, Disney does what they call their blue sky. But it's sometimes you can miss. Walt seemed to collect people that could get themselves inspired, and they would go straight away to a configuration of something, whether it's a building or a show or a lighting thing or an animated character. Unrestricted, they just go straight to a very clever thing in retrospect. And that's why I think so many things while Walt was alive, I worked with him for about 12 years. Virtually everything he did made complete sense. And then as time goes on and companies grow very, very big, and you do stuff in an organized process, orthodox way, and you have a great number of people involved, coordinators, managers, artists, writers, managers, budgeteers, all that stuff. And what do you get? You get a Rocket Rod and you get a Luigi's.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said for organizations which will attract and collect people, and they don't get in their way. They just let them free think, and then one day they go, "Hey, I got an idea. You want to see it?" Well, that's where the spark comes, and Walt knew that.
Did you have a favorite attraction that he put you in charge of, or a least favorite attraction that you worked on while Walt was still there?
Sure.
Would you mind telling me what they were?
Yeah, the Disneyland fire engine.
So I just got to ride on that for the first time last week, and I was kind of bummed. I was looking for you. I was kind of bummed that I didn't see you out at Disneyland. So that I've heard you say in interviews that that's your fire engine.
Well, of course, it's my fire engine. If you go to bobgurr.com, there's a whole bunch of stories, and if you drill down far enough, you'll see the story of the genesis of the fire engine. Because I wanted a fire engine, and I knew I would never have enough money to get one. And one day, Walt was in my office, and in the same manner that he'd come in a couple of years before, and then he slaps his knee and he says, "Say, Bobby, there's something we don't have in Disneyland. We don't have a double-deck omnibus. So why don't you get started on one?" Well, I did the same thing to him, in early 1958. I slapped my knee and I said, "Say, Walt, there's something we don't have on Main Street. We don't have a fire engine." Well, we had a horse-drawn one in the opening days, but it wasn't practical. And then Walt says, "Yeah, you're right, we don't." About 20 minutes later, the accounting department phones up and says, "Walt was just here, and here's the project number so you can get started on the new fire engine project." And I thought, yahoo, I'm going to the fire engine. So I designed it and built it, and then I got a Department of Motor Vehicles permit to drive it down the Santa Ana Freeway from Burbank to Anaheim, a little two-cylinder fire engine. And so I was so proud to deliver that on July 8th, 1958. So ever since, that's my fire engine.
Yeah, that's such a cool story, and thank you for telling it because I have heard it. But these are the kind of things that I'm like, I gotta have him tell to me personally because these are such cool stories.
Yeah, well, what was really neat was a couple of years ago, the historic Anaheim Halloween Parade, cute little parade, been going for a long time. I was the grand marshal, and guess what vehicle Disneyland drove me in the parade in down Anaheim? I got to ride in my fire engine as a grand marshal. I thought that was so cool.
That is very cool. And it's the same one, right? I mean, it's been the same one since 58.
Oh yeah, because the way I designed the vehicles, you can just continue to maintain them because they're all made out of store-bought parts that you can buy and replace anytime.
And they're all the same. That goes for all the omnibuses and the other Main Street vehicles as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. The philosophy of designing something where yes, you can make anything look old and very authentic, but it's all modern parts.
Yeah, that's very cool. So was it 1981? I read that. I've read on. Here's the funny thing that I read on D23's website that you officially went into early retirement. But then I've heard from you on interviews that that's not exactly how it went down.
No, I got fired.
Yeah.
Yeah, I accidentally insulted the chief engineer of Wood Enterprises, and he took very great offense to that and found that as a reason to officially advise me in some very clever words. It said I was unamenable to change. I was dangerous to the new employees, and I should immediately seek a career in another company. So I went out that night and I bought a book on how to incorporate myself. And within the 14 days they allow you, on the day 13, I was the president of Gurr Design Incorporated, a 1244 California stock corporation, and I hired myself.
And you went on to, I mean, you got to do some really cool stuff outside of Disney that I wanted to kind of bring up. Like, one of the things that I thought that I had no idea you did until a few years ago was the designing the King Kong figure for Universal Studios. That is one of, I have to tell you, Bob, when I got off that attraction as a kid, it scared the pants off me. I was so scared to ride it. What was that like, getting to design something so big for such a, like, that was like one of their cornerstone attractions there.
Well, I'm glad I scared you to death. Yes, Universal obviously was a giant competitor to Disney, and of course they were thrilled to death that find out that I'm available. So working with another company as a consultant to them, we did a little bit of preliminary work with Universal, and then Universal wanted to do this King Kong figure. But they basically would ask the company who I was with at that time, Sequoia Creative, they asked for a fixed price on a fixed delivery date of a 30-foot tall animated creature. Wow. Disney never had the guts to ever do anything like that, but Universal would. And the bigger a figure gets, actually, it's easier to design, engineer, and build. Most people don't believe that because there's more relative space for parts on the inside. So I figured out a fairly simple way to do it where if you visualize the whole figure, center of gravity is below its hip joint, so that if something went wrong, power went off or something broke, it'd simply just drift back up to a standard safe position just by gravity. So that was the heart of the thing. If you bought my documentary on the DVD, it actually shows an animation with a scale model of the King Kong to show you how simple that thing was.
So can you, I don't own your documentary. I do have to get it. Can you share the name of it so I can tell people to go out and buy it on, I think it's on Amazon?
It's called, no, not on Amazon.
Not on Amazon.
It's called Bob Gurr, Turning Dreams into Reality.
And can we get that on your website?
You can buy that from 8pendisneypublications.com.
Awesome. So I'm going to have to get that because I haven't seen it. The other thing that I haven't done is read your book because I can't get my hands on a copy of it.
Well, the reason you can't is because I only published 2,000 of the books, 1,000 red ones, and that were all serialized, and 1,000 blue ones. And I'd long wanted to do the book, and it just took forever to do it. And then one day, Carlene Thee of 8 Pen Disney Publications said, well, just do it yourself. It's only a book. So I decided that the publishers make the money and the authors don't. So I said, well, phooey on being an author, I'll be a publisher. So I wound up doing the whole darn thing and wound up shipping them all out of my house.
Wow. That's a heck of an undertaking for someone who's never published a book before. So
No, if you can do a monorail, a King Kong, and a fire engine, why, a book is dead simple.
That's what I was going to say. I guess I shouldn't even have made that statement. All the stuff that you kind of created out of thin air. Of course you could do the book. Just a couple more questions for you, Bob. I saw you worked also with Steven Spielberg on Jurassic Park and with Steve Winnett, the Treasure Island, of course, with the sunken ship that you did out there. What's it like working with those two? Were they? I kind of want to compare them to like another giant in the industry, like Walt. Like, did they work like Walt? Were they completely different? How did that kind of work for you?
Those three guys were peas in a pod. They were. Spielberg was the nicest guy to work with. He's very, very polite. He's a free thinker. He never lets anything stop him. In fact, I used to tell him he was like the boulder in the river, and the water is running up against the boulder, and the water simply runs around the boulder. He's the kind of guy that, well, if this doesn't work, there's several ways to do it. And he had that standard operating thing when we'd look at something, I'd say, well, Stephen, I don't think that's going to work. And instead of saying, well, Bob, I'm going to order you to do it that way, he'd say, well, if that doesn't work, let's try this. And that's exactly the way Walt did it. Steve Wynn, exactly the same way. Well, he was the mogul of Las Vegas, and he ran a giant empire. But he talked directly to the people doing the work at any level, either in his company or any of the big vendors working for him. He was just like, well, if he's got a question, he'll just phone you up. He doesn't even go through his secretary. My phone rang here in my home office. Hey, Bob, this is Steve. I got a question for you. Yeah, what do you want now? And you'd answer his question, or you'd go up in Las Vegas and see him every 2 weeks, and you just have a conversation with him, period.
It's so rare for any kind of boss now. Not even, I've worked for Disney. I'm a former cast member. I spoke with other people who've worked with Walt. I spoke with Rolly Crump. I talked to Julie Andrews. They talked about Walt the same exact way that you just did about Steve Wynn, and about Steven Spielberg. He was completely approachable, and he was a human being, and he treated you like one. And I think that's so rare with bosses, especially these days.
Well, yeah. Example, Steve Wynn, he's a big mogul of Las Vegas. His favorite car is a black Chevy Tahoe. He rides in the front, and he has the big guard dog in the back with a secret word. Steve always told me, he says, I don't want to accidentally ever say the word to the dog because it'll be very bloody if I do that. So, and then one day he had to make a trip down to Riverside, California to look at a new piece of ride equipment. He wanted me to go take a look at it. And so he came down there in his jet, and then they had a local limousine bring him over and hide the limousine in the factory while we did the thing there for a couple hours. And then they would get ready to go back to the airport. Steve jumps out of the limo and says, where's Gurr? And he says, I got a question for him. So he comes out of the limo, and he goes out in my daughter's old Honda, which I had for the day, folds himself up into the front seat of the Honda, and he says, keep the limo in sight. They know where they're going. So that's the way he wants to have a private conversation. Wow. Without his guys. He'll jump in my old Honda, and I'll take him to the plane that way. And then he's got his answer.
Wow. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much the epitome of a regular guy. I couldn't imagine, I don't know, one of the celebrities now. I'm not going to say any names, but still, that's pretty cool. Just one thing I wanted to ask you that I didn't get to ask about the attractions. Is there any attraction that you look at that's recent in the last 20, 30 years, and you say, man, I wish I would have had a chance to work on that one?
Well, nobody's really asked me that question. And usually the question is like, is there anything you would have liked to have designed that you never got invited to? So if you ask the question that way, I'd say, yeah, I think an animated float for the Rose Parade in Pasadena on New Year's Day, I would have liked to have been involved in one of those things because I was always intrigued with the people that could figure the motion work out. I remember a number of years ago, there was two giraffes kind of making out, and the giraffes, they had kind of curly necks, and the way they moved, it was a most enchanting float. And it was done by some local group up in La Cañada, California. And so I called the guys up and I said, before you tear the thing apart, can I come over and crawl through there and see how you did that? And the guy says, sure, come on up and take a look. And so after that, I thought, oh, boy, I wish somebody would have called me. I would have loved to have done something like that.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it's a bummer that you didn't get to. Hey, maybe there's still time. Maybe you can still do one. Get out there and build one now.
Well, I've been over to one of the biggest places over in Pasadena. I got a lady friend there who knows when to call me, and August is about the right time because they got the chassis all done and tested. They got all the major systems in place. They're now starting to close up some of the structure and starting to do some of the actual float shapes. And the float builders, they don't really engineer anything. They have some basic stuff they know how to do, but these are builders who can just look at an artist's picture and then figure it out and just do it all by hand. They're brilliant, brilliant people. Simple ways to work. And then the heavy engineering part, yeah, they got engineering guys that figure out they know exactly how to do that stuff. So, that's the one that builds the big Honda things every year.
Sure.
So I've seen and see how they do it. Sometimes after when the floats are on display at Victory Park, I'll go over there and ask the guys to show me as much as they'll show me. So it's a very, very interesting thing to follow.
That's very cool. So I'm going to try to make this as gentle a segue as possible. I don't know how well I'll do, but going from floats to buses, I was also bummed that I missed your bus tour when I was out. You did one last weekend when I was actually out in Disneyland for the D23 Expo, and I wanted to kind of get the word out about your tours because it's something that I wanted to do, and the last two times I've been out there, I missed and I haven't gotten a chance to do it. So you run a month? Is it a monthly or tour of all the important Walt Disney kind of landmarks out there in LA?
Yes, as you know, there's a lot of Disney fans who really are intensely interested in the history of Walt Disney and his family. And a fellow approached me over a year ago, a guy by the name of Ernie Alonso, who does a lot of haunted house tours in the city of Orange. He said, how about a bus tour of Walt's early life? And I said, well, I've been doing that for my family and friends for 17 years, so let's do it. So we designed a tour. It lasts 5 hours. It's like, I think, $89 or something like that. And it has a box lunch from the Gene Autry Museum. But what we do is in a very small space from Silver Lake to Glendale to Burbank, it's only about a 5-mile extent of travel. We make 16 stops looking at the first two homes that Walt and his brother Roy built. We look at the site of the first Hyperion studio. We go to the merry-go-round where Walt had the original idea back in the 30s to build his own amusement park. We ride the merry-go-round, of course. Then we go to Walt Disney's barn and spend some time there. Then we go to the creative campus in Glendale of Walt Disney Imagineering. Of course, it's a Sunday. We just show them the buildings. We couldn't get in there anyway. And then we go over to the Disney studio in Burbank. So it's a nice 5 hours. And I concentrate on telling the stories that I've known about Walt and his family because, one of his daughters, Diane Disney, was a very long time friend. But there's two stories. Actually, I tell the two stories in parallel because in that same period of time, our family lived in the same neighborhood as Walt. For example, when I was 18 months old, I lived with my grandmother, and she was just 2 streets down from where Walt lived, up at the big house on Woking Way. My mother used to take my sister and myself to the same merry-go-round where Walt was taking his daughters in exactly the same period of time. The Grand Central Air Terminal nearby was the place I hung out as a kid, 8, 9 years old, full of airplanes. And that was the LAX of Los Angeles back in 1930. And then the last year I worked at Disney, my office was in the Tower Building at the old Grand Central Air Terminal. There's all kinds of history of living nearby. When I was a kid, I lived 2 blocks from what is now WDI. So I tell the two stories, and people can't believe you had a life, and Walt's family had a life, and you were all in the same neighborhood. Well, yes, that's why you ride this Waltland bus tour to learn some history you had no idea existed.
That's awesome. Yeah, of course. So you were probably on that same merry-go-round on the days that Walt was sitting out there on the park bench, kind of watching his girls go by.
Yeah, I could kind of speculate fantasy style that the cute girls and the horse in front I could never catch because my horse couldn't go as fast as their horse. And the old guy shelling peanuts and making the mess on the little green bench on the southwest corner. That was the guy sitting there trying to figure, why aren't there a nice amusement park for his daughters to go to? And, well, he'll just make one of them his own. And, of course, World War II stopped him. The Korean War stopped him. And then he finally got going on it about 1952.
Yeah, and here you are, the guy, one of the kids riding a merry-go-round gets to be one of the ones that makes it a reality. That's such a cool kind of makes it full circle there.
Yeah, it's a very... you couldn't actually write a story like that where you combine 2 paths like that, but they intertwined, and I didn't learn all about that obviously much later. So I love sharing the details. We have almost a full load month after month. We do it every month, the third Sunday of every month, and you can go to waltland.com to learn more about it. We were only going to do 1 or 2 a year ago, and it turns out, my gosh, these things never come to an end. We got people signing up months in advance to go ride this bus.
That's so cool. Yeah, I mean, I got to do it, Bob. I got to get out. I got to get back out there. I'm thinking about coming out I'm a runner. I want to come out for one of the Disneyland races. So I'm thinking if I can if my wife says it's cool, I'm going to try to combine a race into a weekend where one of your tours is, because I would love to do it. It seems like so much fun, and you're such a great storyteller, and I really appreciate you being on today and having spending some time with me and my audience. I just have last question for you, and I don't know if you can answer it. I asked Rolly Crump this, and I asked a couple other people this. What's the single? If you can answer, great. If not, I completely understand. What is the single greatest piece of advice you ever got from Walt Disney himself?
Could you rephrase that a little bit?
Sure. So what is the one maybe sentence that Walt Disney said to you that sticks with you still to this day?
There was so much about Walt. I don't think I could give you a sentence that he said, but I could share this. Whenever Walt, with the folks he had working with him, creating everything, when Walt had something nobody else in the world had, and he was showing it off to, Vice President of the United States, kings and queens from around the world, The happy pixie look on his face with his twinkly eyes and his flipping eyebrows, that was a picture of just total joy. We recognized it every time. And those are the things that you never forget about Walt's face.
That's so neat. And I'm sure got to see it plenty of times with all the cool stuff that you got to create out there. So that's very cool. So Bob, thank you again for your time. I told my daughter, I have a 6.5-year-old daughter who I'm converting her into she's already a Disney fan. She's been to Walt Disney World probably 20 times in Disneyland. It was her first trip out to Disneyland last week. And I was telling her this morning as I took her to camp that I was going to talk to you. And I told her what you had worked on, what you had created. And she just rode the monorail last week for the first time in Disneyland. She was a little nervous, actually. It rocks a little back and forth more than the Walt Disney World one does. And she told me, Daddy, I'm a little scared on this one. But she wanted me to tell you thank you. She said, she's 6. So she said, make sure you tell Mr. Bob I said thank you. So thank you so much from her. And thank you for me for all your contributions to the parks. And thanks again for taking the time today.
Okay, my pleasure. Give her a nice big Bob Gurr hug.
I will. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. And that is going to do it for this week's episode of the Ear to There podcast. Thank you so much again to my incredibly special guest, the one, the only, Mr. Bob Gurr. What an honor it was to talk to Bob, and such a smart guy. I mean, I felt like my head was spinning an awful lot during that show. I know he's been called a genius by smarter people than I am, and you can really tell by just the way he talks and he carries himself and how witty he is and funny he is that the guy is certainly a genius. So it was amazing to talk to Bob, and I can't thank him enough for being on the show. I mean, the guy built the monorail, the Autopia, the Main Street vehicles, Doom buggies, the Matterhorn, the darn Omnimover system itself. I mean, he is a legend. So again, thank you so much, Bob, for being on, and that is definitely a talk I will never, ever forget. And thank you so much for listening. It is so greatly appreciated. Every week I try to bring you a fun show, something that maybe you haven't heard. I was trying to ask Bob questions that maybe he hadn't heard before. So I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you really enjoyed the episode. And if you did, all I ask is that you do me kind of a big, but still a small favor. I would love it if you would subscribe to the show and then give it a rating and a review over on iTunes. The best way to do that is to go to eartotheretravel.com/iTunes. I have a step-by-step tutorial there that will teach you how to subscribe to the show. That way you'll get the show downloaded to whatever device you listen on each and every week without having to do anything. And that'll also show you how to rate and review the show. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much in advance for doing that. Again, the address is eartotheretravel.com/iTunes. Okay, well, just remember there will be a new episode of the Ear to There podcast each and every Monday morning, as well as a new episode of the Ear to There podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week. And those will be each and every Wednesday morning. So until next time, thank you again so much for listening. Have an amazing week. Bye-bye.